Good evening. Nice to see all of you this evening. Welcome to the January 21st work session of the Lynbrook School Board. If we could all please rise for the salute to flag. Mr. Pileski will lead us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mrs. Marcus and Mrs. Danino are not in attendance this evening. We have two presentations tonight. Susan Sabin, Director of Special Services, will discuss the special education program, and Dr. Blekas will review our literacy instructions program for grades 3 to 5. Dr. Lynch.
Thank you. So these will become ultimately, the reason why we're having the work session tonight is so we can look at the budget priorities that will be articulated in money in a few weeks, but tonight is the programmatic side of it. So I'll ask Ms. Sabin to come to the microphone and give the presentation. First presentation.
Good evening, everyone. I'm here to talk tonight about diploma and credential options and the continuum of services at Lynbrook Public Schools. Do I need to advance something? It's not on?
On the side, there's a little button. The other side. Push to on. And now the right side.
Are we good?
You want to advance to the next screen?
It's not on at all?
Those monitors aren't on. They were before. And it's, okay. Yeah,
And you're on over here?
the right side.
The right side of what? Just to click?
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Thank you. I'm going to advance. So every student who graduates with a diploma from Lynbrook Public Schools or anywhere in New York State needs to earn 22 credits. For special education students, they are exempt from the foreign language credit. And 4 Regents exams in the core areas plus 1 additional exam or pathway. The diploma options are Regents Diploma with advanced designation, a local diploma, which students with special education, they have an IEP, they could potentially pass, and some ENL students can potentially pass with a low pass safety net, low pass with special appeals, compensatory safety net, and superintendent's determination. And we're off, sorry. Some students, and we just found out that they could remain potentially until the year they turn 22, if they have not earned a diploma, may exit with a credential. These are not diplomas. Different credentials that students could earn are the Career Development and Occupational Studies. This could also be considered that one additional pathway in order to earn a Regents diploma. But this is a standalone credential, again, not a diploma, that special education students can earn. Students who are not Regents bound, they're alternatively assessed throughout school, throughout high school. They can earn a skills and achievement commencement, and those students can remain until, again now, just this is the first year that we're hearing, until they're 22 years old. The reason that this is important is because we really want to consider who those students are who are going to leave our public schools without a diploma, potentially just with that credential. So CSE annually must consider whether a student has severe cognitive disability, and those students are eligible to take the New York State alternative assessment and potentially stay and get exit at 22. So those students need to have these 3 criteria, and I highlight the "and" because it should be all 3 of these. The the student has severe cognitive disability and significant deficits in communication, language, and significant deficits in adaptive behavior. And the student requires a highly specialized educational program that facilitates the acquisition, application, and transfer of skills across natural environments, home, school, community, and/or work. The student requires educational support systems such as assistive technology, personal care services, health and medical services, or potentially behavior intervention.
Can I just ask a question? I just want to
Sure.
underline something. So the reason you're concentrating on that "and" is because unless all three criteria are met, that student should not be alternatively assessed.
Correct.
So all three criteria must be met.
Right.
Thank you.
Right. So we're looking at our continuum of services. Did I advance it for you? Yes. The continuum of special education services that we have in Lynbrook. We're always looking to have children in the least restrictive environment, so they're in the general education classroom. They may require some supports there, such as related services. Some students could potentially be pulled out for resource room or get consultant teacher model. Those are supports all for students in a large general education classroom. And then we do have some students who are in integrated co-taught classroom where a special education teacher is pushing into the classroom for a portion of the day, co-teaching the content with a general education teacher. Our Lynbrook model, some of those students who are sitting in a co-teaching class do get pulled out for what we call the blended program, where they're in a small special class for up to 2 hours out of their school day. That's the elementary model. Whereas in the secondary schools, those same students might potentially be in a small class for one or some of their core subjects. So they don't necessarily need to be in all small classes. If you have a strength in reading and writing, you might be in an English class that's an ICT, a larger class, but you might need more help in math. There you would be in a smaller class model. And then in our elementary schools, we have our very smallest, most supportive setting, class of 8 students, 1 special education teacher, and 2 aides in the classroom. Those are typically where we might look at students and assess if they might need to be alternatively assessed. So those students some of them are communicating using augmentative communication devices. They might have significant adaptive skills deficits, need assistance in health and hygiene and self-care. So those students might be more on a life skills pathway. And we have that program all the way through our secondary schools as well, although the class might be a little bit larger as students get older, with a cap of up to 12 students. The reason we're connecting diploma options and exit credentials, because again, a credential is not a diploma, to this slide right here, and what we do here in Lynbrook, is we want to make sure that we're offering every student every possibility to be in a less restrictive environment wherever possible. So again, some students might have a strength in a specific area and be able to be included in a less restrictive environment. So we need to make sure all of those supportive settings are available in the same place. And that is what we want to make sure students can straddle the less restrictive environment. They can be included in a less restrictive environment, maybe just for social opportunities, maybe just, again, for an area of strength. So that's what we're looking at here, making sure you see the arrows, that they'll be able to straddle across all of those settings. Sure.
Are we offering all of the same services in all of the elementary schools and like both middle schools?
So Lynbrook is a small school district, so these programs that I'm talking about, as we get to the bottom of the list, we may say we have a class of 8, but we may only have 6 students across the whole district that require that. And from year to year, that might change. So every year we have a CSE meeting for each and every one of these students. As they make progress, they may no longer need that less restrictive setting, so their needs may change. If the recommendation changed from one of these to a different one, and it's not available in the same building, they would have to switch buildings. So, and again, the reason that we don't have them, all of these in every building, you might have a cohort of just 2 students. And it's not a productive learning environment, it's not a good social opportunity, it's not fiscally responsible. There are certainly a lot of reasons why we would group those students together all in one place. So every year we look at the cohorts that are coming into kindergarten. We look at our students who are transitioning from kindergarten to elementary school, elementary to middle. In high school, everything's all in one place. It's not as much of a concern. But every year we look at that. We want to make sure that we're keeping this in mind as we're deciding where those programs go. We know we have building size and enrollment concerns to address. So we've looked at all of those as considerations, but the goal is to put these last 3 where we want students to be able to straddle all 3. If you have a child who is very social, but they need all of this support in the very smallest class, you want them to have that opportunity to go into the less restrictive setting for social opportunities. If you have a student who's got a strength in just math, you want that program, that very next step, to be there in the same place.
So to your question there, one of the things that we're looking at and one of the reasons why we're here tonight is obviously, the programmatic implications. You have budgetary implications as well, and trying to figure out where programs belong so that we can have a full continuum. So, along the lines of what you just asked, our goal for next year would be to begin to introduce a full continuum at West End School, so that at West End you would have that fluidity that Mrs. Saban's describing, so that you can move between and among all of those settings depending on what makes sense for you and your individual program. Continuing in that same vein, we'd look to phase that in at North Middle School as well, in the middle school level, so that those kids can have those opportunities to excel in the areas that they excel and get the supports in the areas that they need such supports. And those are important things for people to realize. Also, too, in order for kids to obtain their diplomas, we need to make sure that we're staffing everything properly and that they're all getting access to the Regents curriculum. And I know that's what Mrs. Saban was describing before. There are certain kids that can't access the Regents curriculum. Those are the kids that should be alternately assessed when they hit all those AND criteria. If you don't meet all those AND criteria, you should be in front of Regents curriculum, and that's what we're working on right now.
Thank you for that presentation, and I appreciate Lynbrook's commitment to having students in the least restrictive environment, and those blended programs. While I know they're pricey, I know that they're also really good for the students so that they can, have as typical an experience as possible. You mentioned earlier on the changing guidance that we now need to educate students through their 22nd birthday. And I was just wondering if you know yet approximately how many students that might be and what that financial burden might be for us?
We're speaking about very small numbers, so if I say too much information at this microphone, it will tell you about students. I can say that there's a very small number that this impacts this year, and the budgetary impact, if we wanted to say that, it is likely one of the public tuitions, or but not much more of a fiscal impact this year.
All right, thank you. Just another unfunded mandate from the state.
Yes. Just a messenger. Yeah.
Susan, thank you. The page in the presentation where the 3 conditions need to be met, That's the current recommendation going forward. What were the conditions prior to this year that needed to be met? Was it or was it different?
This has always been the criteria.
Okay.
I think the idea of making sure that we're giving as many students access to the Regent's curriculum as possible. Staying until 22 is something that we may or may not agree with, but if you look at extending the curriculum across a much longer period of time, then we may be able to give access to Regent's curriculum to more of those students who are on the border of being considered alternatively assessed. And that's what we want to make sure that we're pushing for.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
I just want to put on my old hat. One of the other things, so when we're talking a little bit about the choice of
Here?
West End and North, in many ways it becomes a space availability issue. So if you think, let's think specifically of Marion Street and West End, schools built in the 1920s. You can imagine what instruction looked like in the 1920s. You pack 30 kids into a classroom and everyone sat and they stared ahead. We now need to use those classrooms very differently. So there is literally not another classroom left at Marion Street at this point. There is classroom space at West End, and there is room also up at North. So this is as much, it's an educationally sound, I want to not indicate anything other, it's educationally sound, but where can that sound curriculum happen? That's what kind of begs the choice of building. Would that be correct, Dr. Villekas?
Yes, that, it does make sense, and I will tell you that we did check out the facilities and tried to find spaces that would be suitable for the program, because it's not just classroom spaces. There are services that need to be provided, and the whole package did fit best in those two locations.
Any other questions from the board? Okay, so then our second major priority is going to be we've seen some great presentations the last couple of months on what we've been doing with literacy and the science of reading in the elementary level. So we saw our K-1-2 program where we've been doing both the science of reading in the phonics side and many of the other things. When we start to move into the later grades, literacy takes on other dimensions that include comprehension and writing. And I think we're now, as we look for that trajectory, where we had a very well-planned curriculum that began in K, got expanded to 1, got expanded to 2. That cohort is now headed towards 3rd grade. So now what lies ahead for those kids after they've had this application? And Dr. Villekas is going to talk about that.
Thank you, Dr. Lynch. So what we're speaking about tonight are, our group that started in kindergarten with the Sounds Right program. So they had a whole new phonics program, and when you look at reading, Scarborough's rope is a very famous model to look at reading in general. This is one of the representations that I like the best of the rope because the color coding works very well. So what we focused on in the lower elementary grades with Sounds Right is the green part of the rope that you see in front of you. So we talked about basically how to take words off of a page. Now the discussion in grades 3 through 5 is how can we use that information? So you need background knowledge, vocabulary, you need to understand how the language functions, and those are the type of topics that we will be covering moving forward. But the one thing that we did see with Sounds Right, which is what we want to see with our children in the grades 3 to 5, is a very explicit and systematic approach. That is one of the biggest differences between what we did several years ago in the lower elementary grades and what we do now. Everything is very structured, and if you have a student that's been through the Sounds Right program, you'll see that structure, and it's a lot of repetition, and you're burning neurons constantly, and we want to take advantage of that same methodology here. And when we start talking about reading comprehension, it's hard not to talk about writing at the same time, because what we're talking about, in your writing, you're actually creating from the knowledge that you've read or accumulated. So what we're talking about is not just talking about the reading process, but we're systematically teaching about writing And when you talk about writing, back to old methodologies that we all did in school. We're talking about planning, organizing, writing, editing, and revising. You want them to go through that whole process and have an order and basically the checklist of what I need to have a good product. So that's what we're going to be discussing in grades 3 through 5. And again, you saw at the very beginning of the presentation, I really don't want to talk about reading and writing too often around here anymore. I want to talk about literacy because they are so well connected. We're talking about comprehending and using that comprehension to create. And I think that's the important message here. And once we start talking about it that way, we're talking about basics again. So how do we write well? We need to understand how to write a paragraph. If we're going to write a good paragraph and go through that revision process, well, how do you fix a paragraph? You need to know what sentences need to look like. Well, what's that called? Back in the day, we called that grammar. And, we need to work on that sentence structure and the old-fashioned grammatical skills so that we can write better paragraphs. But how do you formulate a sentence without understanding words? So going back to that idea of word study and vocabulary building, we're going to bring back some of those old-fashioned techniques of talking about prefixes, suffixes, Latin and Greek roots. And, anybody that's seen what's coming down the pike with the elementary schools knows that this can't be taught in isolation. Everything that we're talking about needs to be embedded in other subject areas. The 5th graders will be sitting for the first time for our 5th grade science assessment. The vocabulary needs for that assessment are very large. How do you learn these word attack skills? You learn them through a very solid literacy program, and that program should be embedded in what we do. So we are not only just talking about, working on reading and writing, but we're talking about reading and writing within disciplines. Thank you.
And I just want to thank Dr. Balekis, and actually the key partner in all of this are the practitioners. So we've assembled a district-wide committee that will be looking at how this should be implemented across the curriculum. And I really like that type of leadership where we bring teachers to the table, so this isn't coming necessarily imposed. It's let's work on it. Let's see. So I do have to brag a little bit about my visits to the elementary school. So I am ready to admit I was a high school English teacher. I think elementary kids are cute. I don't necessarily know everything that's going on in those classrooms. So the teachers invited me in to see what they do. And it's really quite astounding. So when Dr. Balekis is talking about the level of science that is expected of 4th and 5th graders, when I saw one of our teachers literally using the words that were used in my doctoral study about independent and dependent variables, and I saw 4th graders talking in that language, it's pretty astounding. So now you can see the natural connection to what Dr. Balekis is talking about, because now they have to write like scientists. So it really is, I think, an exciting way to look at it. And again, we thank Mr. Kirschberg's out there. We thank your unit for joining with us and partnering.
Any other questions? Any questions from the board?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Balekis. And, this aligns really nicely with the New York State Literacy Initiative that the governor announced. And I know that the New York State Education Department is working on giving more guidance to schools about. Did we have a particular program or programs we're looking at, or is this just more a conceptual framework of how we will need to teach and, where we are with that?
So right now, as Dr. Lynch said, we met with our constituent group of teachers who have been wonderful partners. So right now it's been a philosophical discussion about how we're changing approaches. We have several programs that we'll be looking at, but I'm not so sure we're going to end up adopting a program. One of the nice things about Sounds Right is, there is an approach to it, but there's no materials. Sounds Right was taught with a whiteboard and markers. That was the program. It's what the teachers make of it, and that's the great part about working with real professionals. The teachers are there, ready, willing, and able to help splice different pieces. And one of the things we did hear from the State Department is they're not really ready to endorse a specific program to make this work, because to teach all of the elements that we just said really well takes,
resources from all different places, and I know that we're going to be exploring which parts would work best for us. And, and again, we talk about Sounds Right as the program that we're teaching with the phonics, but we also brought in If She's Alphabet for the vocabulary and, the actual handwriting. So there's all different pieces that we're going to keep merging together to make the best product for our children. And I have to say, this is very exciting work. And all of us were really excited in the room, and that brain trust that we have, it's been a really good relationship. And I think that we're going to produce a really good product for kids. And instead of just bringing in, like we talked about before, reading and writing teachers, we have the scientists represented at the table too, because we want to make sure that this is driven through content areas as well, and making sure that all the constituents are represented. And I think that unified effort is tremendous.
No, I really appreciate that answer, because I do think that authentic literature and authentic content information and professional teachers that are well trained are the best way to do this. So I'm glad that that's the approach we're looking at, because we do have great teachers, and if we train them well, they'll do this amazingly.
No, thank you.
So that's it.
So as we take a moment as we break from now for our next meeting, which will be on February 7th, for the 10 people that are watching online, and as they spread the word, we're putting notice out now that the governor is making drastic cuts to the aid she provides to schools. So I hope people aren't going to come up here in March at board meetings and start to show an interest then. There are significant changes she's making to the aid we get at school districts. Now is the time to start looking at those numbers, contacting your elected representatives, because they are the ones that can impact our budget. All the things we've talked about here, all the things we've done over the last several years cost money, and that money is dependent upon the aid we get from the state. And right now, the numbers she's putting out are not helping us do that. She's very concerned about her housing plan and her personal agenda, and not focused enough on what we need to do as a district. So hopefully, the 10 people will turn into 20 or 30 other people, but there's nothing else we can do as a board but to give you notice of that. It's not going to help to come to us in February and in March complaining about those numbers if you're not doing something about it now. So our district has always done well with the numbers. We continue to provide with the highest level of education that we can, but we rely upon that aid from the state. And right now, the numbers she's showing us are drastically cut from what we've had in years past. So look at that as an initial warning of interest to get involved and become aware of that, because if it continues in that direction, we will have to make some significant decisions.
And just to piggyback on Mr. Belmont, the governor proposes a budget, but our local representatives are the ones who actually adopt it, so they are the ones that actually can make changes to that. So now's the time to get in touch with them and ask them the things that we're already asking them from our perspective.
Nothing else from the board. We'll conclude this meeting, and we'll pick up again on February 7th. Thank you.